So today we're diving into a story, a mother's fight for her kids. We're really going to unpack it. It's Cindy Smith's case, and specifically this legal document. It's called a Writ of Mandamus. And basically, it outlines some pretty serious accusations against the judge in her custody case. She's claiming unfair treatment, possible bias, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, these writs of mandamus, they're not something you see every day. I mean, they're basically a last resort, right? Like when you believe a judge has, well, messed up, to put it bluntly.
And in this instance, Cindy's saying the judge's decisions weren't just wrong, but actually violated her constitutional rights.
Exactly. And that's key for our listener to understand. This isn't about someone just appealing a decision they don't like. This goes way deeper. A writ of mandamus, it accuses a judge of acting outside their power or even with prejudice.
Wow, yeah, that's serious stuff. So to really get into it, we kind of have to rewind a bit. Cindy's writ, it details this whole long custody battle. She was the primary caretaker of her 3 kids all through her marriage. And they stayed with her after her ex-husband, Matthew, was arrested for domestic violence against her back in 2019.
That detail about Cindy being the primary caretaker, that's huge. Courts, when they're looking at custody, they want to know which parent has been doing most of the caregiving to figure out, what's best for the child. And the fact that the kids stayed with Cindy right after that domestic violence incident, that really strengthens her case.
Which makes what the court did later even more confusing, right? Because at first, things seemed like they were going Cindy's way, like during that initial custody hearing. Judge Tetrault was his name. He reviewed everything, all the evidence, testimony from both sides, and he granted Cindy sole physical custody.
Right, so that tells you, Judge Tetrault, he saw something there, compelling reasons to side with Cindy. Especially with that documented history of domestic violence, judges don't take that lightly.
Exactly. But then, this is where it gets weird. A different judge, Judge Cafazzo, she took over the case in 2022. And after the trial, initially she seemed to agree with the previous judge. She gave Cindy custody of their daughter, even acknowledging the trauma she'd gone through. And for their sons, she granted a 50-50 custody split.
So it seemed at first like Judge Cafazzo was trying to be balanced, recognizing each kid's needs. But this is where those inconsistencies Cindy's alleging, they start popping up.
Because, get this, just a year later, Judge Cafazzo completely reversed her decision. She gave Matthew full custody to the parent with a documented history of violence. It's like, what happened?
And that's the million-dollar question right there. What could possibly change things so drastically?
Well, according to Cindy, this all came down to her ex-husband claiming she was doing what the judge called a campaign of alienation against him. But, and this is the kicker, this totally contradicts what another court had already ruled.
Okay, now this is where things get, concerning, to say the least.
Right.
Cindy's writ says that another court had issued an abuse prevention order against Matthew after a physical altercation that involved his kids. But Judge Cafazzo, she basically dismissed those abuse allegations during the custody hearing, even though there were witnesses, a police report,
Wait, hold on. So she basically said, I don't care what this other court said. I don't believe it. Can she even do that?
It's very unusual, say that. Courts are supposed to, be consistent, especially when it comes to kids' safety. A judge just disregarding an order like that raises some eyebrows for sure. Makes you wonder if they're really considering everything.
Yeah, and it's not the only time these decisions, let's call them questionable decisions, were made. Cindy's writ also talks about how Judge Cafazzo barred her current partner, Stephen, from having any contact with the kids.
And that's where we got to look at the law, right? What evidence did the court have to restrict someone who's not even a biological parent? In Massachusetts, to limit a partner's access to children, you need solid proof they're a danger to those kids. Stephen, he didn't have a record, no history of abuse or anything. It's like the judge just decided based on, a hunch, not real evidence.
Seems that way. And this restriction, it happened even after DCF, the Department of Children and Families, investigated those claims against Stephen and found nothing.
See, that's crucial. That's a pattern. It's like the court's just accepting Matthew's word without really checking if it's true.
Yeah.
DCF did a whole investigation and cleared Stephen. That should have meant something.
So we're seeing inconsistencies concerning decisions by the judge, and this, unfortunately, is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Cindy's case. We'll dive into the rest of it after a quick break.
And to make matters worse, as this was all going on, Cindy, she couldn't afford a lawyer anymore. She had to represent herself in court.
She went pro se. Right. That's got to be tough, especially with a case this complicated.
Oh, absolutely. Talk about being outmatched. She might know the emotional side, but the legal stuff, procedures, evidence rules, that's a whole other ballgame.
Which brings us to another one of Cindy's big accusations, how Judge Cafazzo handled evidence. Or didn't, really. It's what? Like, depending on if you're reading the judge's early findings or the later rulings, it's like two different cases. For example, at first, the judge acknowledged the trauma Cindy's daughter went through, but then, poof, a year later, it's like that trauma disappeared from the case altogether.
Yeah, that back and forth, it's a huge red flag. A judge's decisions, they have to be based on evidence, not just, changing their mind or personal feelings. And leaving out key stuff like the testimony from that officer at Matthew's domestic violence arrest, that's really bad.
Seriously, that seems like a huge detail to just ignore. That officer could have said a lot about Matthew's history of violence. Why wouldn't the judge want to hear that?
Exactly. It makes you wonder if the court was getting the full story. Domestic violence, it's not just one-off incidents, it's a pattern of behavior. By ignoring the officer, the judge might have missed a chance to really understand the risk Matthew posed to the kids.
And then there's that whole thing with the abuse prevention order against Matthew, the one Judge Cafazzo just brushed aside. Cindy even mentions this legal case, Santosky v. Kramer. She says her right to due process was violated. Can you break that down for our listener? What's so important about that case?
Right, so Santosky v. Kramer, that's a big one. The Supreme Court said parents, they've got a fundamental right to their kids, and taking that away, it's serious. You need strong evidence, and the court has to follow the rules. That's due process. Cindy's saying Judge Cafazzo didn't have enough proof and ignoring that other court's abuse prevention order. That's not following the rules of due process.
So due process, it's like a fairness guarantee. Everyone gets a fair shot.
Exactly. A fair hearing, a chance to present your side. Cindy's saying she was denied that by a judge who didn't care about another court's order or important evidence.
It blows my mind how one judge can just contradict another, especially when it comes to kids' safety. It's like, shouldn't that be consistent?
Well, the system tries to be fair and consistent, but it's not perfect, right? Judges, they're human, they make mistakes, and sometimes, like Cindy's arguing, maybe there's bias. That's why we have things like this writ of mandamus. It's a way to hold judges accountable.
And it's not just the custody stuff and the evidence that's questionable. Cindy also claims that Judge Cafazzo treated her differently because of her PTSD. She says the court didn't accommodate her disability like they're supposed to under the law. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act, right?
Exactly, the ADA, and it's there for a reason. Courts have to make sure everyone has equal access, so if someone needs help, like assistive listening devices, more breaks, even testifying remotely, the court's supposed to provide that. If Cindy asked for that and was denied, yeah, that could be a violation of her rights.
And to make matters even worse, it seems like the financial side of things wasn't handled fairly either. Cindy says that even though she wasn't employed at the time, the judge still ordered her to pay a crazy amount of child support.
Yeah, and that raises some eyebrows too. Child support, it's not just a random number. There are guidelines, formulas. They look at both parents' income, expenses, the whole picture. If a judge doesn't follow those guidelines, there needs to be a really good reason. Otherwise, it makes you wonder, are things really fair?
And get this part is confusing. Cindy claims that Judge Cafazzo, she took a $14,000 refund, money from the sale of their house, and she basically said it was Cindy owing back child support. But Cindy's arguing, no, that money was for their mortgage and utilities during the separation, that the court had ordered those payments.
Wow, okay, that's a serious accusation. It's almost like the judge misapplied the law and it hurt Cindy financially. Those payments for housing, utilities, they're not child support, they're totally separate. Mixing those up can have big consequences, especially for someone like Cindy who is already struggling.
So basically, Cindy's saying Judge Cafazzo wasn't just making bad calls, but actually being unethical, unfair, just treating her terribly.
It's a lot, that's for sure. This writ of mandamus, it's a powerful tool, but it's tough to win these cases. But the fact that Cindy filed it, that tells you something about how determined she is to fight for what she believes is right for her kids. This shows you justice isn't always easy. It can be a long, tough battle.
It's heartbreaking to think about what she and her kids are going through. And it makes you wonder, even if another court does side with her, what does that even look like? What are the chances she'll actually succeed?
Yeah, it's not as simple as just, another court hearing her side of things. Even if they agree to take the case, which isn't a guarantee, it doesn't mean they'll change what Judge Cafazzo decided. They usually look for, very specific legal errors, not just, oh, we disagree with how the judge saw it.
So they're not really deciding if they agree with Judge Cafazzo, more like, did she break any rules, mess up the law somehow?
Exactly. Cindy's asking for a total do-over, a chance to have her case reheard or at least looked at again with fresh eyes. She wants them to see everything, leaving out that officer's testimony, ignoring that abuse prevention order, and then decide, were those legal mistakes?
And what's the ideal outcome here? What does Cindy actually want the court to do?
So her writ, it lays out some pretty specific requests. She wants the higher court to just toss out, vacate, they call it, Judge Cafazo's custody orders, especially the one giving Matthew full custody. She's arguing the whole decision was just wrong from the start, contradicted other rulings, and put her kids in danger.
A clean slate, but realistically, how often does a higher court actually step in like that and make such a big change?
Honestly, it's rare. A real uphill battle. Courts don't like to interfere unless it's super obvious that a huge mistake was made, a real miscarriage of justice. For Cindy to win, she has to prove that Judge Cafazo wasn't just wrong, but like acting unfairly with prejudice, you know?
So proving that bias, that's a big part of her argument.
Huge. And it's one of the hardest things to prove in court. Cindy needs to show a pattern that the judge consistently favored her ex and made things harder for her. And she has to do all this while dealing with the complexities of family law, where they tend to give lower courts a lot of leeway.
It's just, this whole situation, it really makes you think about the system itself, right? It's supposed to be about fairness, justice, but it's clear that it can fail sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's often the people who need the most protection, like Cindy and her kids, who end up paying the price.
Absolutely. It makes you question what happens when the system designed to protect actually causes harm. Where are the checks and balances, and how can we make sure everyone, regardless of their circumstances, has a fair shot at justice?
It's a lot to grapple with, and while we've gone deep into Cindy's case, the legal arguments, the what-ifs, it's important to remember this is just one story, one case, but it speaks to something much bigger, something about the law, about families, and about the fight for fairness that continues long after the gavel falls.
It really does make you think, doesn't it? What can we learn from Cindy's experience? What can we do as individuals and as a society to make sure the system lives up to its promise, to ensure that justice is truly served for everyone?
Those are the questions we all need to be asking. And that's a wrap on this deep dive.